Welcome to LearnHowToQuilt.com. I'm Ann, and this is the second video in our Star Sampler series. Today you'll get some pointers for choosing your fabric for this quilt, along with the different yardage requirements. Now, as you can see, this quilt's made up of many different fabrics, but you can get by with just 6 or 7 if you'd like a more clean look. So before you get started, you'll have to decide if you like this scrappy look or maybe a less busy look. Neither is right or wrong, it's just your preference. If you like this more scrappy look, you'll need about 1/4 yard of 6 to 7 lights, 6 to 7 mediums, and 6 to 7 darks. For a more clean look, you'll need about 1/2 yard of 2 lights, 2 mediums, and 2 darks. Don't worry about getting fabrics for the borders and the backing. We'll go over that later on in this series. This is what I called a controlled scrap quilt. It's scrappy because there's a whole lot of different fabric in here, but it's controlled because I kind of set some rules beforehand before I put the fabrics in this quilt. First, I found what I call a focal or focus print that I used to figure out what colors I wanted in my quilt. Now, usually this is a piece of fabric, but in this case, I actually used a painting, a picture of a painting that came off an old calendar that I really liked. And so I used this to find the colors. For example, this blue and white can be found in there. You can see this yellow here. So first you look for colors in your focal print. And the next thing I did was look at pattern. So pattern means a number of things. But first you want to think about size. For this quilt, you want a smaller size pattern for these tiny areas, and maybe you could get by with a medium size pattern in these areas. So this is an example of a smaller size pattern. This would be more of a medium pattern, and you can see that when I cut this apart, you'll still be able to see some of this design here. And this is a larger scale pattern. This type of pattern would not fit in this quilt, maybe for the backing, but not for the front. If you cut into this fabric, you're going to lose a lot of its design. It's okay to cut into this if you want this little pink area, but if you want this overall design, it wouldn't work. The next thing you need to think about pattern is the feel of the pattern. So let me use these 2 fabrics here as an example. So when I look at this painting and I decided, I want a traditional, serious type of quilt, this fabric right here could be kind of a traditional fabric and it might fit in. This fabric has the same colors in this, but not the same feel. It's more Americana type feel. This fabric has some of the oranges that you can see in the fruit bowl, but the vibe or the feel of this fabric, it's a novelty print. It really doesn't fit in with my serious traditional type style. This fabric also has many of the colors in here, and polka dots are traditional, but they're kind of silly, and I wanted a more serious type pattern. Now you might say, whoa, this looks like a watercolor. Why don't you use some batiks? I agree, this would look great in batiks, but I don't have a big collection of batiks. And most of my batiks have patterns in it like this. This pattern is just too organic and it's not very traditional. So thinking about the pattern after you choose the colors is very important. One last word on pattern. You want to be careful when using striped or directional prints. All sorts of problems can occur when you cut them into smaller pieces. For example, you might have to work extra hard at getting these stripes to line up just so. When using directional prints in triangles or star points, you'll need to think about the direction of the print. In this case, the print's going this way and then this way. If you just change a few of these out, you can get everything going in the same direction. I don't want to discourage you from adding directional prints because they can add a lot of interest to your quilt. Just be aware that you might need a little bit more patience when using them. So the next thing you need to think about when choosing fabric is the value of your fabrics. Now I have it last here, but it's probably the most important choice you'll make because the value of your fabrics determine the design in your block. So let me explain that. All of these blocks are based on the same pattern. This 9-patch block. There's 9 squares, but because I place these values in different spots, each block looks a little bit different from the other one. So the value of the fabric is very important in showing off your block. Here's another example of how values can change your block. In this 4-patch block, I have reds and blues, but they're of the same value. They're dark. If I switch out one of the values, in this case, I made the blue light and the red dark, you'll see the design of the block much better than if I used all the same values. This block isn't necessarily wrong, just that the pattern or the design of your quilt block won't stand out as much. Next, I'll go over these steps here to show you how I chose the fabric for the quilt that I'll be working on. First, you'll want to find a focal print. I've decided that I'm going to use this red, white, and blue. It's kind of traditional pattern for my focal fabric. Then you want to look for the colors inside this fabric. They don't have to match perfectly, so let me show you what I mean. First, I'll look for reds. I noticed that this is an orange red, so I decided to choose my reds in that color range. This is a rule that I'm making to help me control the scraps in my quilt. So when I look at these 2 reds, I see that this one has much more orange, and this one over here is more violet. If you have difficulty seeing the difference between these 2 reds, you might want to use a color wheel. Here's a pure red. When I add yellow to it, I get an orange, and halfway between that orange and red is the red orange, and this resembles that red orange. This red doesn't have the orange in it, and it's not really a true red. It's going more towards the violet side. I'll put this aside for now. Maybe later on I'll decide to add just a little bit of this red to add a sparkle because it's a little bit different, but for now I'm going to put it in my discard pile. Later on in this series, you'll get some tips about adding that little sparkle to your quilt, along with more information about tints, tones, and shades. If you'd like to purchase a color wheel like this, you'll find a link to Amazon below. Here are some reds lined up from orange reds all the way over to the violet reds. This is a good exercise to try with your fabric or with bolts at a fabric shop. It'll help you see colors better. So let me go back to choosing reds for my quilt. I want my reds to be mainly in this red-orange or maybe over here into this red area. That's a rule that I made. Someone else might decide that they want to include all these reds. That's your preference. Here's a red that's more of that orangish red, and so I think I'll use this for now. Here's another red. Now these white dots in here, this is kind of beige. It could work, but I think I'm going to say no to this. Red is an orange red, but I think this might do, so I'm going to hold on to that. This is a darker version. I like throwing some darks in there, so I'll hold on to that. Here's a red, but it's got some other colors in it. So if I'm looking for reds, I'm going to hold on to this till we talk about pattern. And here's another one of these with pattern, so let me hold on to that. So I'll go through my blues and my whites, and I'll do the same thing, pulling out the colors that I like. So next I'm going to look at pattern. This is more of a traditional, sort of serious, maybe even fancy print. Sometimes I think this might be something I'd see in upholstery fabric or on pillows. So let me look at this pattern. And this pattern also is sort of a traditional type pattern, and it has a lot of the same colors in. And so if I'm looking at pattern, I'm going to hold on to this. So while this is a traditional type of pattern, it's floral, and I don't know if florals go so good with that. So I'm going to toss this. This is sort of the same thing. It's a floral pattern, and I don't like it with this traditional pattern. So get rid of that. Now this one is more of a traditional sort of early American print, so I like that. This one, it's a tone on tone, and you really don't see the print so much. It is a floral print, but I think I could get away with that. This one's kind of more of a traditional print, so I think this would look good in my quilt. This one's too whimsical for this pattern, so I'm going to get rid of this one. And this is a small tone-on-tone print. I think it could be labeled as traditional, so I'm going to hold on to this one. So I've narrowed my pile of reds down to these prints here. And now I'm going to arrange them by value to make sure that I have enough lights, darks, and mediums in this color. So value is kind of relative depending on the fabric that it's next to. So when I look at just these reds, I'm going to hold this here, and that's pretty light. Oh, I forgot that I added this one. This also is light, and you can see that it's lighter than this one. So if I was doing a quilt with just these two fabrics, I would say that this is the light and this is the medium, or this is the medium and this is the dark. But let's add another fabric in there. Put this one, and you can see that it's darker than these other two, which is okay. So now I'm going to add this one. This is the darkest. Let's add this one. Not quite as dark. So I've got some lights, maybe a medium, and some darks. And this one might go in here. Oh, prints are kind of hard to determine where they go. So let's move this down. Sometimes if I squint my eyes, I can tell. Or I don't have my ruby beholder, which is a piece of red glass that I can look through to see what's darker or lighter. But I think I'm going to change it like this maybe. And I'm going to say, no, I think I like it back the way it was. Okay, so the main purpose of this is just to make sure that you've got some lights, mediums, and darks in each one of the colors that are in your quilt. I've arranged each color by value. It looks like I've got lights, mediums, and darks in those colors. Now, does it mean that I'm going to use all this fabric? Maybe not. Usually what happens, I find a couple fabrics that I really like, and I'll use those more often. And maybe I'll get to a point and I think, none of these work right. Then I go back into my stash of red, white, and blue fabric to see if I can find what I'm looking for, or I might treat myself to a new piece of fabric. So after you go through and choose your fabric, you can put some of those fabrics aside in order to limit your choices. For example, if I only want to use 6 fabrics in my quilt, I've decided that I like these 2 lights, these 2 mediums, and these 2 darks, along with this focal fabric. I've chosen these 6 because I like the way they go together, and I like that there's a little difference in pattern in some of these. I'll need to get all of these pressed before I cut out my next block. You like the look of a controlled scrap quilt, but the thought of choosing all that fabric is overwhelming. You might want to purchase a package of pre-cuts. These 10-inch squares or layer cakes are part of a coordinated fabric line and are large enough to make most of the blocks. I don't like to mention this because I think learning how to select fabric on your own is an important skill in quilting. It's also what makes your quilt unique. but I realize that a lot of people are busy and don't have the time to spend shopping, so this is a quick and easy way to collect your fabric. I hope this video helped you choose fabrics for this quilt. I've left a link below to this drawing of the quilt that you can use for planning. I could draw this up on graph paper, but I wasn't able to convert it on the computer. If you have any questions or concerns, please comment below or email me at ann@learnhowtoquilt.com. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with your friends. And have fun looking for that fabric.